water and get seated. Only because I know him, I can tease him and say, Eon, don't worry, we'll have the break time to shake hands and I'll get my hug as well, which is important. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for being here. I actually have the most simple of all of the roles of the folks who will be up here this morning. Aye. That's okay. That's a sounding. That's an opening up sounding. My name is Nadia Figueroa. I am a director with JAMP. That's a Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal. And really, I have the honor to warmly welcome you, to set the tone, and to overview the program. Doesn't get more simple than that, but I feel it's important because we have a really ambitious program today. So getting the tone right from the get-go and making sure that we have you along for the journey is really important. Yeah? So first things first, on behalf of the board of directors, the team at JAMP, our indomitable leader, Jeanette Calder, right? And the really hard-working team behind the scenes, we want to greet you and warmly welcome you to this morning in which we will be engaging on the topic of business integrity, building a commercial advantage through trust and good governance. Now let me cover up top the three objectives. When I said we're ambitious, there are three layers or levels of things that we're aiming to do today. Right, the first is that we want to explore with each other, business leaders in the room, how it is that integrity, good governance impact upon long-term investment, consumer perception, and profitability for businesses. So already beginning to unpack. Let's get beyond the concepts and the words, good governance, so what, right? But then also, it's important that we introduce JAMP, share the work of JAMP, and begin that conversation about how we can be doing more with the business community to facilitate good governance. And then the third bit, and I'm smiling at Mr. Howard Mitchell because this was really his provocation to us. We have to really have something participatory to round up the morning. So we're going to be punting to you, the audience, after you've had your listening and learning cap on, hearing from folks locally, globally, folks who are in the trenches on governance in Jamaica. What are we thinking in this room as far as some of the really practical, actionable next steps? So stay with us through till after the break because we're going to be breaking out, generating ideas that we're then going to report back to you on. Yeah? So on the setting the tone bit, three things, really quickly, because as we say, we feel the way in which we have the discussion is almost as important as the what of the discussion, right? So why? Why good governance? Because it matters. We wouldn't be here if we didn't feel that it matters. You know, but how are we treating with it today? Very kind of purposefully. There are three observations I want to bring into the tone setting and the framing for this morning. One is let us try to suspend judgment. We're very particularly moving between the them, us. You will know that JAMP is an organization that front and foremost deals with transparency and accountability around public resources and finances. That makes all the sense in the world. But the deeper you get into the work, you realize that when you're talking about something like governance, there are things that cut across spheres and sectors. So it doesn't serve us to be siloed. Or see the public sector issue over there. See private sector and business over here. See the individual issues over here. There's a way in which some of these elements are all one and the same. So we're here specifically on business integrity, but it's important that we're building those bridges and we're not theming and using in any way in the room today, because we feel that's important in getting to the productive solution making. Yeah? The other thing I'd really like to provoke us to do is to move beyond the exceptionalism. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have a global perspective with us today. You know us in Jamaica, we're original and we're special in many different ways. But there's some things we hold on to as though we're exceptional and we can get away with it. We're not going to build a prosperous and peaceful society of racketeering and gaming and scamming. We could be the best at the world at it. It's not going to happen. I want to give you a small personal example. Like many young Jamaicans, I probably spent, about 5 years working overseas in the UK. Listen to my own ignorance and arrogance. I work the money there, I save the money there, I pay taxes on the money there. I want to access the money. Hear them to me. Are you domiciled in Jamaica? Myself in my ignorance and arrogance. Through inheritance, I have a British passport. I worked there, I'm paying taxes there. Oh no, we're sorry, you're domiciled in Jamaica, we're not interested in banking your money. But I'm not even a business entity, like I'm an individual, academic, civil servant. So that's a bit for me on that I needed to move beyond the exceptionalism. Because I got that email and I thought, I'm Jamaican and British. I worked the money there, it doesn't matter. So we're not going to be able to be exceptional to the direction that the global system is moving in. And we have opportunities to navigate that, standing in our integrity. That's an exciting opportunity. So my last bit on the toning and the framing, everyone has a role, know them and us. Not one sector against the other, not one individual against the other. Moving beyond the exceptionalism. And the last bit on the toning is let's embrace evolution. So we're proud of the history. I feel that especially the private sector in Jamaica, you have to be so entrepreneurial, opportunistic, a bit like a cowboy or a cowgirl. That's how things get done. But there's a way in which some of the things that served us back then are not going to serve us now and not going to serve us going forward. So when we said governance, in Jamaican parlance, how you split justice, how you make decisions, how you distribute resources, how you determine what's acceptable and not acceptable behavior, what is the response when there has been unacceptable behavior. All of this is governance. If we don't have trust and respect and feel good in that, then how can we be strategic for the future? We can racket and game to here, you know. But if we can't figure out how we're going to be compliant about a set of standards that we agree with, there's no strategy towards the future. I think we can agree on that in this room. So the governance matters. We're moving to a place of every person has a role. Yes, we're exceptional, but there's some things we just cannot get away with and we don't want to get away with. And we're going to embrace evolution. We're maturing. We see it in the macroeconomy. We can't debt ourselves to growth. We get that. Now we see it in the governance. We need to come up the curve together. So very quickly, please open your program for me. As I said, we're being really ambitious. So I just want to quickly walk us through what we have planned for today. Immediately after my opening, we're going to hear from our partners without whom this work would not be possible. Yeah? So we'll be hearing from Mr. Aniceto Rodriguez-Ruiz, who's the head of cooperation at the European Union delegation to Jamaica. And immediately following him, we'll hear from Oliver Blake. That's the head of political and development team in the Jamaica and Caribbean Governance Lead. That's the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Thank you not just for being here with us today, but in partnership on the work. So appreciate it. Now, from there, we're going to have a very special treat. If you have seen these two gentlemen working on this fireside chat, I think part of it is that there's so much they want to bring that they've had to work through to prioritize the points. But we have with us Richard Bistrong, global speaker on anti-bribery and building integrity into business. He's speaking from lived experience of having run afoul and understanding from that perspective the implications, but also the advantages of going for good governance. And we couldn't do any better than to have the one and only Douglas Orane sitting with him in conversation. So we're really anchoring that in the Jamaican experience, venerable business leader, senator, author, speaker, needs no introduction. So we're really looking forward to hearing that global to local conversation. Immediately after that, we're going to hear from JAMP, Jeanette Calder. Very important that she's demonstrating the tools. So you hear Jeanette, you hear of JAMP, you know there are few voices as forthcoming on issues, advocating, doing the press releases, lots of engagement with media and different groups. What you may not know is that really JAMP is very technologically driven. And so there are tools that have been developed that are meant to empower citizens in holding representatives to account. We're going to see those tools, and then we want to hear from you how we're partnering with you to really utilize those tools. So that's the JAMP bit. Break, quick. Final bit, anchored by Howard Mitchell. We have an illustrious panel. Again, the folks who are in the trenches. Now we're getting into the next steps, actionable strategies and solutions around how we're coming up the curve on governance. So who did we want with us for that conversation? We have Camille Facey, Chair of Corporate Governance at PSOJ. He's not in the room with us right now, but we really do hope that Selwyn Hay, who's the head of the Financial Investigations Division at the Ministry of Finance, will be able to join us. And then we're also very fortunate to have Andre Tuller, who's the Chief Regulatory Officer at the JSE. Howard will be facilitating that. We're going to hear from our panelists. thinking through what are some of the things that you could be doing right now. But then, as I said, we're going to punt it to the audience, have a bit of breakouts, generate some ideas, and we have some criteria at which we're going to evaluate which ideas sound most ready to go. Right? Don't be alarmed if you see us kind of rotating around the breakout groups when you're brainstorming. There's a rapporteur in the room, Hillary Nicholson, and we're doing that on purpose because we want to collect the information to get back to you at the end of it. Yeah? So you're with us, you have the program, you know the characters who will be in front of you, you know our direction of travel. We who've been organizing are most excited for the last component to hear from you guys and to get really concrete about, okay, we've had the conversation, what next are we heading back to work to do? Thank you so much for being here. And without further ado, our partners will be bringing their greetings. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dear friends from the UK High Commission, from civil society organizations, the academia, private sector, good morning to everybody. Civil society organizations are key actors in protecting and in promoting democracy, rule of law, and human rights. These are fundamental values for the European Union. But CSOs are also key partners in devising and implementing policies, implementing programs that meet people's needs, reduce inequalities, create more legitimate and accountable states, leading to better social cohesion and stronger and more open democracies. The European Union is a long-standing global champion for civil society as development actors in these both aspects, promoting democracy, rule of law, and human rights, but also in providing services, sometimes instead of the state or somebody else. And then, therefore, the European Union supports the engagement of civil society to contribute to democratic processes and also to achieve better development outcomes. This is why in 2023, the European Union provided a second grant to facilitate the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal to further contribute to the system of governance in Jamaica. The EU is committed to supporting initiatives that strengthen good governance in Jamaica's both public and private sector. Accountability, ethics, integrity in both business and government leadership are vital to building a sustainable and prosperous future for Jamaica. Then we are really pleased to support a forum which provides valuable opportunities for executives across Jamaica's industries to explore practical strategies, integrating compliance, ethics, and integrity into their corporate policies and decision-making processes. While engagements such as these can serve to redefine traditional concepts of profitability to encompass also sustainability, community impact, and good governance, it also fosters constructive dialogue and trust between Jamaica's business executives, government officials, and civil society leaders. We are also pleased to have supported the development of JAM's accountability tool and underscore that their utility extends beyond the citizen and media to cater to the interests of the parliamentarians, business leaders, and public sector executives. Probably you know, otherwise I will tell you, that the ongoing EU priority called Global Gateway is a big switch in the way how the European Union has been doing cooperation for more than 60 years. Because now what we think is that we have to integrate much more private sector partners in development, because private sector is an absolutely crucial, essential element in development. Otherwise, the 2030 objectives, 2030 is already after tomorrow, will not be met, because we need all contributions and all the resources coming and going in the same way. This is why, as business leaders yourselves, you will agree that we have a greater potential for achieving sustainable development through the enforcement of joint actions that balance business profitability, but also respecting the highest social and environmental standards. I also use this opportunity to invite you to discuss these new means of cooperation between the EU and Jamaica, which I believe it could be of great interest of you. I also extend my best wishes for the outcomes of this interaction. I hope that there will be a robust dialogue that sees participants exchanging best practices, identifying challenges and opportunities, creating initiatives across industries to strengthen compliance systems, and forming strategic public-private partnerships to champion in good governance. Thank you very much.
So, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all big up ourselves this morning for coming along to such an important event. I'm very pleased to be able to come and represent the British High Commission this morning. I'm not going to repeat what Aniceto has said in terms of all the reasons why we're supporting this event. I subscribe fully to what he has said. What I want to do is to think back a little to this question of exceptionalism, and also remembering work we did elsewhere on this topic. Now, I spent many years in Nigeria some years ago. For those of you who know Nigeria, and particularly Lagos, is a very big business environment. Indeed, the whole GDP of Lagos and its environs is half the GDP of West Africa. Yet, when I was there having discussions with business in Lagos, they recognized that they couldn't be exceptional. They recognized they needed to connect. They needed to break out of business in their, may call it a bubble, a very large bubble. And the work that we were able to support them there to do was very much on this theme. It's the question of building partnerships and building trust. And that was how they wanted to reach out. They wanted to build partnerships with British companies coming into Nigeria. And to do that, you have to have a certain reputation. You have to know, people have to be able to know who you are and what you do, and how do you do that? And I think this work that they did through the stock exchange in terms of a sort of self-certification scheme was really valuable to them, both in demonstrating to themselves how they could reach the highest standards, but also being able to demonstrate to partners wanting to invest in Nigeria, who of course wouldn't, how can you know from outside what the situation is? And the same goes in Jamaica. If you're wanting to invest in Jamaica, you want a partner. How do you know what that partner can do? How do you know what standards they keep? And this is what they did through the Nigeria stock exchange. And it was a very powerful tool. I think that highlights for me that in many ways, the work, this type of work, is really at the forefront, perhaps one of the most important work around good governance and fighting corruption. Sort of, in the UK, we look at corruption, fighting corruption in three ways. We look at sanctions, systems, and society. Sanctions, I can't see Selvin Hay here yet, but obviously that's his area of things. The sanctions side of things, people do need to be investigated. There needs to be a sanction. But not everybody is going to be sanctioned in terms of what happens. The more that can be done, it can be a deterrent. Systems in place, putting government systems in place, regulations for business are all important too. But collectively, people in the right places with the right will, you can always get around those systems. So what it comes back to is really important, is a society agenda. And that society agenda is very much led from civil society, whether that's groups like JAMP, whether it's groups like the Stock Exchange, whether it's business forums, whether it's faith groups, all the civil society groups, building that culture of integrity and responsibility and accountability is really where you get the long-term sustainable change. I'm not saying that the sanctions and the systems are of course important and they help, but they depend on really that work of society. So I wanted to say again, congratulations to everybody for coming along this morning, and wish everybody a very successful event, because it really is the type of event which is fundamental to moving forward on this agenda. Thank you very much.
Folks, did you notice me doing something a while ago? I was turning my cell phone to do not disturb, and I'm suggesting all of us do the same. Richard and I have a big challenge, which is to be so engaging, nobody will get on their cell phone for the next hour. So let's see how we do at that. And there's one other thing I need to do. This is to advertise that back operations really work. And this is preventative, sitting on a cushion, and I'm pain-free ever since. You can talk with me in the coffee break about how to be pain-free. Richard, great to be here. Let's test your mic.
Good morning, everyone. Doug, thank you. Nadia, Jeanette, to JAMP, to our partners, and to everyone here, including our live stream guests. It's an honor and pleasure to be here.
Okay, so Richard and I, with others, we had dinner last night. We shared a lot of anecdotes with each other. And in fact, we're going to use a lot of anecdotes. Why? Because we think what you all are interested in is when you get to a fork in the road to make a choice between doing good or not, how do we make it individually? And both of us have lived through personal experiences like that. We want to share it with you. So in order to get going, we have a short video that we want to show. So let's get our video rolling. In the meantime, while they're getting the video up and running, Richard, as you know, has traveled the world. He has had personal experiences with corruption personally, and that's why it's so fascinating to listen to his personal journey. He's very much like St. Paul on the road to Tarsus. He had this revelation and said, you know what, I'm going to change my life completely after falling off his horse.
Yes.
So, okay, video ready? Okay, if it's not ready, Richard, what I'd suggest, let's go into the first question.
Okay.
And then we can watch a video at a later point. Okay, so one of the things is that you've been on the front lines of many issues in corporations and what people face every day. So can you tell us a little about your journey and how, as you have put it, you have moved personally from corruption to compliance?
Yeah. So thank you, Doug. So a little bit about my journey. I spent 20 years as a sales executive. It happened to have been in the law enforcement and defense business, but it's not a law enforcement.
Dark side.
Oh. Well, we can start that from the beginning. This tells a little bit of the story.
That's why I believe in low technology, you know, like having a rap session personally. Tell you what, technicians, when you're ready, let us know. Put your hand up. So let's keep going, Richard.
about the dark side of international business.
Richard Bistrong is a former corporate executive who was convicted of international bribery and served more than a year in prison, but he cooperated with the government and went undercover to expose other crimes, and he is now an anti-bribery consultant, and we appreciate you joining us.
You run this firm right now, but one of the reasons you run it is because you were involved in a corruption scandal, you were a wire for the feds, you served time, and now you do consulting
So
on
what
this.
would have stopped me? That's the one I had 14 and a half months in prison to think about. I didn't appreciate that just by nodding my head, I have created liability across the entire enterprise. So how about we use our time together to surface some unknowns and make some difficult issues discussable?
Great video. Richard, can you tell us a little more about your journey?
So, as I'll share the commerce part of it first. I was a sales executive, working for half of my career focused on the U.S. markets, and I spent the second half of my career focused on the international markets. And it was when I joined the company, by the way, it was a small enterprise. In fact, it was in insolvency at the time. So it wasn't big business to start. Now, 20 years later, it was a much larger enterprise, but it's also a small business story. And when I started so I'm dating myself a little bit. In 1997, I got the role from being the vice president of US sales to the vice president of international sales. Because, like here in Jamaica, right, we not only want to explore the local market, but we want to explore other markets as well. So that's what my former employer wanted to do. They were going to go out and hire a international sales vice president. I'm like, that's the job for me. I love traveling. I had 10 years of great success in the US market, and I was anxious to explore the emerging markets. So I got the role, and I would spend the next 10 years, I was overseas 250 days a year, part of that time living in the United Kingdom as well. And, well, Doug, there's $2 trillion of corruption in the world. So I'm speaking globally here, being siphoned off of our global economic systems. And, I certainly saw that in my international travel. But I also want to be careful because, we'll talk more about this, but ultimately where I got in trouble and got caught was in New York on a UN conspiracy to bribe a UN official. So I want to be clear, this is a global issue, right? And I think there are high-risk parts of the world and low-risk parts of the world. I don't think there's any place that we can say, oh, there's no risk. And as I started to confront corruption, I started to think, what does the company want? Now, I signed what's called anti-bribery paperwork. So I knew that bribery was illegal, right? To bribe a foreign official to win business or to keep business, either on your own paying the money or even through like what we call a business partner. That's against the law. It's called the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So I want to be clear. This is a story, Doug, of personal accountability and personal responsibility. So I'm going to share, emotions from former commercial Richard, justifications, rationalizations, but this story is no one's fault but my own. So I promise there's no ethical spinning this morning. And I just challenge you to think, and we'll talk about what this means here in Jamaica. But due to no one's fault but my own, I started to think, trying to grow the business, what does the company really want? Do they want these aggressive sales objectives, right? what do we want to do as a business? We want to grow. The company was anxious to grow the emerging markets. So I had very aggressive targets. And again, this is no one's responsibility but my own. I had a very lucrative pay plan. If I made those targets, I got a big bonus. But I also signed that FCPA paperwork. And in some parts of the world, I felt that pressure to succeed, and the pressure to comply. And I thought I was in the middle of competing corporate objectives. I was in the crosshairs. But there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's a natural part of being us, is sometimes we might think, what's the right thing to do, right? Do I have to sacrifice integrity to succeed? Well, we never have to sacrifice integrity to succeed, right? There are always ways to succeed that are ethical and sustainable and responsible. But instead of reaching out for support and saying, I am having a tough time out here, and we can talk about why it's sometimes difficult to speak up, especially about ourselves, and to reach out for help and support, and to say, I need guidance. Like, I'm not sure how we can succeed in some of these markets, I asked myself the wrong question. And that was, with all these great sales, because I did succeed and I succeeded early, I said, does the company really want to know what it's like out here, right, with all this success? And I decided on their behalf that they didn't, and started to take ethics and compliance and integrity into my own hands. And that wasn't in a lot of big steps. It was in a few big steps. It was in a lot of little decisions that started to add up. And it added up 10 years later when I got caught by the regulators as part of a global oil for food scandal in the United Nations. We can talk more about that. But when the Department of Justice called me and said, through my lawyer, and said, you are the target of a criminal investigation for violating the U.S. anti-bribery law, I was very clear. I said, I did it. I didn't take this international job to end because I wanted to get a call from the Justice Department or to go to prison. I took it because I was excited about it. So, my life had gone way off course. And I said to my lawyer, I want to face justice and not delay it. And I know that there are going to be consequences for these decisions that I made. And if I want to change the course of my life, that I need to face those consequences. And they were also in the United Kingdom because I was living in the UK for part of this time, so I was also violating similar laws in the UK. So the law followed me around, right? And I told the government everything. I told them about crimes that they knew about, crimes that they didn't know about, and ultimately I served 14 and a half months in prison, and it could have been decades had I not cooperated. The judge was very clear about that when I got sentenced. And then when I got home, I started looking into what's going on in the ethics and compliance world, and I saw a lot of different perspectives, law firms, forensic firms, advisory firms. What I didn't see anyone talking about is, what is it like to work in high-risk parts of the world, tasked with aggressive commercial success, but you also know there are legal guardrails on what you can do. And long story short, that's what brings me here today, as former commercial Richard and current compliant Richard.
Well, thank you, Richard. You have been very honest and candid with us. As a quick follow-up, is this a bribery story this morning, or is there something wider that we have at stake in this room? Is it about, well, you tell me, is it about a former felon are we talking about governance, risk, and compliance, or is it something wider than that?
Okay, so first I'll talk about the story, and then I'll talk about maybe why it's, why you brought a former felon here to talk about it. So I think that the story isn't about bribery. It's not about the defense. And just to go to Nadia's comment. It's a story about why good governance matters, right? And how does that work? It works in how we interact with each other, right? Internally within companies and externally. And going to what Oliver shared, it's a story about trust, personally and from a corporation. It's a story about reputation. And I'll talk also from a personal perspective and a corporate perspective. And what is it like to have a culture of integrity? So thank you for your opening remarks. So that's really how I think about it, as a wider story of trust, reputation, doing good business with integrity. And as far as bringing a former felon here, you might say, what can a former felon offer us about ethics and compliance? He can either be a former felon or an ethics and compliance consultant. He can't be both. I get that. So for the next 45 minutes, I'll just ask you to open up your hearts and minds that I just will try. And I just want everyone to appreciate that as much as, because I even have that conflict, as much as I appreciate coming here, I mean, these are letters. This is from my daughter. This is from my sister. These were letters to me in federal prison. Like, as much as I enjoy being here, I wish I was doing anything but, right? I wish that these letters were never a part of my life. So I just want to be clear that I regret these decisions. I regret my conduct each and every day. So with that said, I still hope we can make some difficult issues discussable and surface some unknowns.
Well, thanks for opening your heart to us. I hear this all the time here in Jamaica and elsewhere, and that is, yes, all that is about governance and ethics and so on, but does it really create value for shareholders? What's the answer to that? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
But we can move on, but I'll provide a little more detail. And it goes, when you look at our global economic environment, it's really about supply chains and partnerships, right? And trust in business is critical now. And to Oliver's example in Nigeria, when you have a reputation for good governance, trust, and doing things the right way, companies will seek you out. And I've heard major multinationals talk about, we can't risk having our project or program interrupted because one of our suppliers or sub-suppliers is having an issue. Like, we cannot risk that. So the more you gain a reputation as an organization, as a country, for doing things the right way, the more companies are going to seek you out to be a part of this responsible supply chain due to trust, reputation, good governance. And right now, I mean, I will speak in the work that I do now, there are very sophisticated tools for companies to look up partners on due diligence. So if there is a reputation issue, companies are going to move on to find another partner. Or if you're not listed anywhere and they can't, there's no accountability and no transparency, they're going to be like, we can't do business with a company that we can't find out anything about. So, understand you're under the microscope for being a good partner. And the more the word gets out, the more companies will seek you. And I think we were talking last night at dinner about Guyana, probably one of the biggest oil finds, certainly in the last 50 years. It's massive. The amount of infrastructure that's going to go into that project is something like we've never seen, at least in the last century. It's enormous. And, here in the Caribbean, that presents tremendous opportunity. We were talking about, PVC pipe manufacturing. I mean, it could be any one of a number of components that will be critical to actually having successful exploration and producing this oil. What a tremendous opportunity. But I will share with you that, there have already been some hiccups, for lack of a better term, in Guyana, and I think that the stakeholders there, both public and private, just as an example, are very sensitive to who they're doing business with. So again, opportunity and risk, I think right now there's just a tremendous opportunity out there.
So I know there are business executives in the room who get on planes and go overseas to various markets, not only Guyana, but across the world, expanding. So if I am a business executive and I get to this country and somebody says, you have great products, but you need to help to smooth things through by helping this person, in inverted commas, how does a Jamaican executive, particularly a young Jamaican executive who doesn't have that experience, answer that question?
So
to smooth things out, in inverted commas, you know what that means, or not to. What do they say in order to say, I'm not going that route?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Doug. I've heard every possible word you can use to describe a bribe, from smoothing things out to taking care of people to making people happy. I've just heard every word but bribe, right? So I'll add smooth things out to my list. First, I would encourage young people to think about that happening before they get there. There's wonderful research that talks about if we think about these very tricky situations in advance, it's much more likely that we'll act on our values when we face that situation. So, you have to, not have to, but I encourage younger people to look at the long term. Don't let the short-term hazards of, I want this business now, overwhelm what's long-term important to your business, which is to grow it as a responsible partner. And, that might mean saying no. Or it might mean saying, I believe in my product, I believe in my technology, I believe in what I do. Because if you believe in your company, then you're also believing I never have to take a shortcut or pay a bribe or to, use one of these terms to get things done. And there's a great example of that, which is a corporate example. Siemens, which is probably a company you may have heard of, and they have all different types of platforms and products and technology, had a huge global corruption scandal probably about 10 to 15 years ago. I mean, they literally had to almost gut the company because bribery and corruption was the way they did business. Now Siemens is a leader in anti-corruption. They have a foundation to help civil society. They're an important voice in our compliance and ethics community. But the interesting part of this, to your question, is the chief compliance officer said, if you look at our financial statements now, after we've changed the way we do business, and you looked at them before, while we were paying bribes to win business, we're more profitable now. So, and he realized, thank you, and he said, what we now appreciate is when you sell your product based on your value proposition and your product proposition, and not on who you're taking care of to get the business. It may take longer to get the business, but it's more profitable and it's more sustainable.
Okay, Richard, a follow-up question. When we were speaking last night, you used some phrases like speak up, psychological safety, failing well. What does that really have to do with compliance and good governance? Those terms.
I think that goes to the individual responsibility that if we see something that doesn't look right, with the JAMP tools, for example, to have an opportunity to speak up about it. And I know I brought along this book. It's called Speak Up, Big Surprise. It's a wonderful book, and it's not a long read. And what she says is, speaking up is not in our bloodstream. We all fear speaking up. Speaking up goes against almost every human instinct, which is what she calls instinctual fear. So it's something that's not easy. But what, for example, JAMP and some of these other tools that we're talking about, is it also makes it easy to listen up. Because I think we put all the pressure on the people that are speaking up, right? Oh, I have an open door policy. Well, now I'm the one who has to walk through the door. Oh, we have a hotline. But now the pressure is on me to call. I mean, just the word speak up, like we're putting all the pressure on the person. So I would just challenge everyone to think, what are you doing to listen up? So are you asking people just open-ended questions about how, what's going on out there? How can we help you? Because the more we're encouraging and showing ourselves that we have a listen-up mode, not a shut-up mode, like the more likelihood that people will say, you know what, we have some challenges here, I want to talk about them.
In fact, we were discussing this earlier, and Richard said something very profound. He said, this matter of people speaking up or using whistleblowing or whatever, they're much more likely to do it if they've already met the most senior people in the organization. So what's the lesson for that? All senior leaders, make sure we go out and communicate about this face to face with the folks in our company, because then they're much more likely to say, yeah, I know John Brown, I feel comfortable enough saying, hey, something is going wrong here, rather than the senior leadership being faceless. So put that in your notes, folks, as soon as you leave here, to go out and spread the word face to face in your company. So I'm going to move on to, I think you had a slide, the LRN slide. Yeah. Can you bring it up, or would you like help from tech?
So
okay, it's
just
up.
Very quickly, this is a practical slide. We were talking about ethics, risk, and compliance and programs. And LRN is a advisory and an e-learning company, and they did a 5-year study of companies that have high-performing ethics and compliance. And two of the things that spoke to me as former commercial Richard and current compliant Richard is the first pillar there, and I'm going to step up a little bit, about companies that use values to guide compliant behavior. So part of this is not all about policies, rules, and procedures, right? We all have values. Go to any company, their values and their mission and their purpose is on their website, but they don't come to life through a web page. They come to life through our decisions. And having a values-based approach to ethics and compliance is very strong, because everybody wants to have good values, right? Everybody wants to stand for something good, and that is how we inspire people. It used to be policies, rules, and procedures. Here's the rule book. There shouldn't be any questions. If there are, ask. But the problem with the rule book approach to ethics and compliance is, what happens if there's not a rule for something? Does that mean we can do it? And there's a great book called Blind Spots about this, that talks about if we just think our decisions are about, am I following the law or not? That doesn't help us, because what can happen is we can say, oh, there's a little loophole here that I can go through, and then we end up, Doug, with lawful but awful decisions. And we have seen plenty of that in our world. So think about your values and think about how we inspire ethical decision-making through inspiring people's values. And then the other one here is embedding ethics and responsibility into decision-making. So I'm going to go back to Doug's example. You go overseas, someone's telling you, you're not going to do any work here unless you take care of me. Well, are you embedding that risk into that person's forecast, into their incentives, into how they make decisions? Like I always say, just say no to bribery. Is that helpful? I don't think so. I think it's a wall poster, right? Because what do you do when you get there and someone says that to you? Just say no isn't helpful. What's the conversation that needs to be had to move the business forward the right way? So I like those first two pillars about using values to inspire ethical decision making and making sure that you're having these proactive conversations with people so they don't feel like I once did, that they're out on their own when faced with ethical dilemmas.
Okay, so continuing along that vein, there are different degrees of corruption in the world, and they vary from country to country. But here in Jamaica, I hear people saying this all the time. I'll switch to Jamaican Creole. You ask them about corruption, and is it going to go away, or is it going to go worse, get worse? And they say, so it's set. In other words, it displays a certain fatalism and helplessness in their minds that it can't change. But the question is, how do we turn the tide of those feelings to move towards better governance if people really believe, so it's set?
I'm loving that I'm picking up some local terms here, by the way, thanks to Doug. So I just want to, I'm going to give a one-word answer based on what Nadia shared, and that's evolution. If we think we're going to do and move the needle on good governance and transparency overnight, it won't happen. And what we have seen, and I think we've seen this right here by being together, it's a multi-stakeholder approach. It involves companies appreciating their responsibility for ethics and compliance and good governance. It's civil society challenging organizations. It's also about government that has the political will and the laws and the regulations and trained enforcers to enforce the laws that do exist. But it's also about everyone's responsibility and the responsibility of each and every one of us to appreciate that we are the gatekeeper and guardian to our own values, to corporate values, and that one of my clients has a wonderful hashtag for their ethics and compliance, and it says, responsibility starts with me. And I think that's such a wonderful way to express it. So that's not easy, but one ethical decision at a time, you can go into that evolution. And we have seen countries that have moved that have gone from not a very good brand to a better brand. Not the best, but it's one small step at a time. But we've also seen countries go the other way, from good governance to bad governance. So I really think of it as a journey and not a destination, because we never really get there. To say that, we're fully ethical, that's unethical, because we're not, right? We're all subject to ethical mistakes.
So we have in the audience or in the group with us here several young Jamaicans who have either started their own businesses or about to start them. And I think it's really important to hear how they feel. And we have a Q&A after this when we're up here. But one of the things I hear people saying is that the younger generation it's not only in Jamaica but elsewhere in the world with young entrepreneurs. The idea that you do whatever you need to get started, and then you can fix it later if you have stepped over the penalty line, because no one is going to get hurt by what I'm doing. It's a natural progression that they're going through in their minds. So the question is, it's not a question. The fact is, it is a fundamental flaw in having that approach. given the new technologies and new frameworks, etc., you can go back 20 years now to see what somebody's reputation is on social media. So the risks are much bigger. So the question is, how can a young entrepreneur avoid stepping over that penalty line early when they're saying, I can't find any other way to start or grow my business?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And sometimes that's a very gray line, right, in terms of stepping over that line. And, you know, my story started with people and my business partners just sharing that they were paying bribes without asking me for anything, just saying, this is how we win it here. So I started to think, okay, I want to have good personal and corporate values and integrity, but not if it puts me at a disadvantage. So I completely understand that mindset. So, I mean, going back to let's see if we can get this slide.
Oh,
there we
okay,
go.
There we are.
So going back to a much younger Richard, I mean, here I am in India. You know, I'm all smiles. I'm thinking everything's great. But what I didn't appreciate were all the people I was putting at risk. My company, innocent employees, innocent clients, and my family. Right? Just by being a part, not just, but by being a participant in, let's call it what it is, transnational crime. But look at that face. I'm thinking everything's great. So what I didn't appreciate is that ethics and integrity is everyone's responsibility. So that line is a very slippery slope. So for young entrepreneurs, you know, it may mean you grow a little slower at the start, but it also means 10 years later, you're going to still be standing, you'll be profitable, and you'll be doing business the right way. So, no, thank you.
Yeah.
So the earlier you get started on this good trajectory, and not the former Richard slippery slope trajectory, the more likelihood you're gonna keep that path. So the earlier you think about it, the better.
So it's interesting you had that slide about India up there. You saw you have traveled the world. But how do companies survive and thrive if they're surrounded by an environment of rampant corruption, but somehow manage to function with integrity? Is it possible in some parts of the world, which are high risk, to succeed without sacrificing one's ethical behavior?
Yeah. I'm going to reverse these slides. I don't want anyone getting ahead of me here.
Okay, it says, that's the India
there we
slide.
go. Okay.
Right?
So this is really interesting. How can you succeed when you think that you're in a wind tunnel, right, with respect to what everybody else is doing? And there's a great book, as you can tell, I like to read a lot, called Success in Africa. And it talks about how companies and small businesses and individuals have succeeded in some very difficult parts of the world. And I'll give you one example. There is a particular country in Africa that still does not have the greatest brand reputation. If you heard it, you would say, I might not want to do business there. But you know what? Their fashion industry has a reputation for good governance, responsible business, they're accountable, they're reliable, and multinationals are now sourcing their fabrics, they're sourcing actual fashion products from this country. So going back to the evolution, sometimes it's not the whole country that moves forward at the same pace, but one specific industry says, no, we have a lot to offer here, we have great textiles, and we're getting out from under this framework. So it is possible, and you know, we were talking about the personal side of this. One of my clients also, you know, works in a high-risk part of the world. He's in procurement, so as you can imagine, a lot of people that he's talking to are demanding kickbacks, for example, to do business. A lot of commercial bribery. He's in a really tough position. And you know what he did? Is he put a picture of his family on his wall. And he said to people who responded or asked him for bribe, either they wanted one or they were offering one, he said, you know what? I can't do that. I can't do it personally. My corporation doesn't allow me to do it. But you know what's most important? Is if I do it, these people on the wall, I'm going to hurt them. And I'd never do anything to hurt them. Now look how that, and by the way, that's the end of the conversation. Mm-hmm. So just look at how that little, sort of focused and intentional decision to talk about your family shifted that conversation. So I think we can really be creative about just, if he would have said no, that might have been one thing. Showing a picture of his family, he was still able to advance the business. So I think we need to be creative and be patient and believe in what we do. Thank you. Thank you.
So Richard, how did you recover from SH #T hitting the fan? And what are the lessons from that for a corporation that has a cataclysmic event that caused by bad governance?
Well, I didn't need for Doug to translate the $% #S for me, so I got that. I'll speak as an individual, and I'll also share a corporate story. It's a process of going from shock, when you get a call from the United States Department of Justice that you're a target of a criminal investigation. That's shock. And from there, it leads to shame, right? You're shamed in society, you're shamed to your family, you're filled with regret, and then it goes to change. But you have to, or I had to, absorb every phase of the shock, the shame, and the change. Like, you can't just go to change. You need to go through all three of these. And you know where I got that statement from? From Volkswagen. So you may have heard that Volkswagen engaged in a cheating scandal where they basically gamed the emissions of their diesel cars to meet U.S. emission regulations. $1 billion of fines and investigation costs, and it's a much different company now. I mean, they are leading, electric mobility. It's a fantastic organization, and there was a press conference with the person on the board that was responsible for ushering Volkswagen out of this scandal. And at the first press conference, and she goes, it is not easy going from shock to shame to change. So that's how I think of my journey as an individual in terms of having a cataclysmic event. But I also think for a small entrepreneurship or anyone else, you can get through it, but you need to absorb what you did to move on to a new chapter.
Then, in terms, again, of your personal journey, your personal experience, what does it feel like to go to jail for corrupt behavior? And how did this affect your relationship with your family?
Yeah.
And do they keep talking about it? And can't you just put it in the rear view mirror and forget about that? After all, it happened, 15, 20 years ago?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. And here I am. Let me see if I can. There we go. So there's this great book by author Amy Edmondson called The Fearless Organization. She wrote the book on psychological safety, and she has a term called dangerous silence. So over the 10 years of my international sales career, I wasn't calling anyone to say, I'm having a tough time out here, and no one was calling me to say, you have no international sales experience and are highly successful, how are you doing it? So I think we need to be careful that no news doesn't always mean good news, And we have to be mindful that sometimes bad behavior, like in my case, can hide behind good performance. Until that all ended, and there I am in 2009 after my plea bargain, because I pled guilty, was opened, and that's the U.S. courthouse in Washington, D.C. I'm walking out of my plea hearing with my defense attorney. Okay, so here's the family part. So my case became very public. So that is literally the front page of the New York Times, and that's the front page of the newspaper in Florida where I was living at the time. That's the entire front page of the Sunday section. And I had 2 young adult children at that time, and my daughter was off in university, so she was a little bit removed from this, but my son was in high school. And high schoolers aren't always that nice. And in a time in this young man's life where self-awareness and self-confidence is already fragile at best, he was subject to social ridicule, embarrassment, humiliation. His friends literally could not come to our house because of headlines like this. So I don't want to understate it. It was catastrophic. It was catastrophic for him. It was catastrophic for us. And, you know, rebuilding relationships is also a journey. So, you know, Doug, all the people I thought I was helping, let's go back to the young entrepreneur, right? All the people I thought I was helping, I'm making all this money for my company, right? I'm making a nice bonus. I'm taking my children on wonderful holidays all over the world. I thought no one was getting hurt. Those were the people that I hurt the most. So I always encourage, especially, you know, younger people, but regardless of age, stay close to your family and your network of loved ones, because traveling 250 days a year, I got separated. And because we can talk a lot about good governance and responsible practices, but our families and the people that are counting on us to do the right thing, they can do a lot to keep our ethical compass where it belongs. And why I still talk about this and not put it in the rearview mirror, a couple of things. Number one, the $2 trillion of global corruption is still there. It's not going anywhere. And the challenges, like we're talking about today, are still very, very stubborn. So, and it also, by sharing the story, reminds me never to convince myself that it wasn't that bad, because it was that bad. So I'll just wrap up with, I think I have 2 more slides here. Oh, there we go.
I think you've skipped
Okay, so
one,
I want to thank everyone from joining me on this journey from shame to change. That's my prison card. I was recently named as a top social media influencer. And, you know, these are accolades that I would have never have thought possible sitting in a prison cell in 2012. And I also want to share that for most former felons, they're not in Jamaica, you know, beautiful Jamaica, sharing their story. Tomorrow I'm heading to Amsterdam. Yes, 2 days ago I was in Boston. What are most former felons doing? They're trying to find a job. They can't find housing. They're ostracized from society, and they're not giving anyone a second chance. They are struggling. So I just want to share the humility and the appreciation for this opportunity to share this journey. And I hope it was helpful, and I'll just leave us. I know we have some time for questions, and
sure.
If anyone wants to scan this QR code, I'm way too active on social media, so you can feel free to connect with me from LinkedIn to Instagram, and hope we can continue this conversation.
Okay,
thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So now we're going to open the floor for any questions or comments or personal experiences that anyone would like to share or ask Richard about? Yes. Oh, need a mic. Technology. It's coming up over here. Can you give your name, position, or company or with entity, and then the question or comment?
Hello? Yes, Oliver Blake, British High Commission.
Can you stand as well so the others?
Yes. I'll come back to what you question of advice for the young executive. I remember being given advice years ago from a very senior business person saying, if you've got a bad boss, basically you need to move jobs. If you're a young executive in a company you find that their values are not yours, what is the advice? Do you have to move company? Thank you.
Yes, so speaking to my younger self and looking at things now, Oliver, if you think you are working in a toxic environment with a bad boss, and that's impacting your values and your way of work, I think the first option is to explore, maybe I'm a big believer in mentors, is to talk to a friend and to say, or a professional friend, and say, this is what I'm experiencing. And just to check with someone else that, maybe you don't have a bias that's impacting your view of your boss. So mentors are great for, have a wingman or a wingwoman to double check, and then raise your concerns, right? First, give everyone the benefit of the doubt. And if you feel that you're in a psychologically safe environment to have these conversations, and maybe challenge your boss to say, this is what I'm experiencing, and maybe that wasn't what the boss's intentions were, right? So we give everybody the benefit of the doubt, but if at some point it's clear this is the way things are done around here, then it's time to move on, because if that company gets in trouble and that's on your resume, that's a shock to shame to change that you'll have to deal with. So I like the mentors, double check, benefit of the doubt, try to have the conversation, and then if nothing works, to move on.
So I just want to give a short anecdote of my own personal experience, but coming from totally the opposite direction. So as many of you may know, I'm the retired chairman and CEO of Grace Kennedy, which is a group, a food and financial services group built and thriving in Jamaica. And this is for the overseas people who are online watching us. But in my years when we did induction programs, so when we had new employees, we'd have them in a room for a day or two explaining the rules and how to access benefits and so on. But when I spoke with them, what I spoke about was personal behavior and values. And what I said is, we live in a country where we have different subcultures. We have the informer for dead subculture. We have a subculture of remaining silent when we see things going wrong, what I call a culture of silence. We have others. We also have a subculture, I wish it was more prevalent, of honesty and integrity. And I said, we at Grace Kennedy have chosen one culture, and that's honesty and integrity. Now, if you are a new employee coming in, we welcome you if you believe in our culture of honesty and integrity. But if you don't, resign today and go somewhere else. A lot of people said, Doug, how could you say a thing like that to our employees? You know what people came up and said to me after the session was finished? They said, Mr. Orane, I'm so glad you said that, because now I feel so safe working in this environment. And so there's a message about how to connect and set an example from the top. A lot of what we're talking about is the tone at the top. What we as the leaders, wherever we are, set the right example and let others know about it. We have another question.
Yeah. Good morning.
And before we get this won't take more than a minute, because I brought this. This is an original. I know football is big here in Jamaica. This is a real FIFA red card. that was given to me by someone on the ethics and compliance team there. And what I've seen companies do is they have truth teller days where the leader, and sometimes it's random or sometimes it's deliberate, gives the red card to someone and says, you're the truth teller. Tell me what I'm not thinking about. Tell me what we can do better. Tell me something I don't know. And they make it fun. And it also speaks to, you're allowed to speak truth to power in this organization. So I love this little red card exercise. It's fun and it creates that safe environment.
Well, it's better you get that rather than like in football, you get sent off the field permanently. Yes.
Good morning again. Richard Coe. I'm a small to medium business owner called Fleetwood Jamaica Limited. My question to you, Richard, is you are getting away with these practices over 10 plus years. Was there a point in time that you thought to yourself, I'm going to get caught? And if you didn't get caught, would you have continued? So I ask that question because in Jamaica, I think we have a culture where even if you get away, even if you get caught, people can cover up their mistakes and pay off people so that they don't get fined, imprisoned. And it brings me back to an article, Douglas, that a three-part series that you posted several years ago. And it's one of my posts on my social media because I believe in it so much. And you spoke about how Jamaicans can sit on the gully side and wonder how they're going to make ends meet, but they travel to the US and they become successful because there are systems in place that hold people accountable. So anyway, that's just a general comment, and I encourage everyone to read his articles. But back to you with that question.
Yeah, so there's something called optimism bias, which is the belief that the chances of me getting caught are less than the chances of anyone else getting caught. And traveling all over the world, 250 days a year, I wasn't thinking I was in the earshot of law enforcement or my company's, legal leaders. And the challenge, and this is, behavioral research, is that the longer we're not caught, the more we think we're never going to get caught. And I was selling armored vehicles, armored vests, products that were there to safeguard the health, welfare, and safety of individuals and teams. So I wasn't thinking I was hurting anyone. Sometimes my corrupt conduct got the product there faster and less cost due to the corruption. So this combination of, no one's getting hurt here, right? We talked about that before, and I'm never going to get in trouble. I never had that look in the mirror moment until we got a call from the prosecutor at the DOJ. Then I had a serious look in the mirror moment. And I think that if I was not caught, and I know this sounds strange, but the best call I got in my life was from the Department of Justice, because I don't know that I was going to change the course of my life. So and it was probably a part of the culture of doing business. That's exactly what my mindset was. This is how things get done in this industry. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question. I'm going to recognize technology. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll tell you where to go. Next, there's a lady coming up. There you are.
Hi, good morning. My name is Atoya Fry-Williams. I'm a business owner, also the executive director of Forward Step Foundation, which is a non-governmental organization that works with at-risk youth. So my question is geared towards that. As an successful person and someone who is pushing integrity, not only in business, but integrity overall, that is 2 questions. So the first one, are you actively doing any social development with youth who are at risk? And 2, as a young business owner or someone who is looking to start a business in a country such as Jamaica that is prone and open to corruption and integrity is the least on our list for most persons, what would be the best advice you would give to someone in that capacity?
Okay. And the first question was, am I engaging in social?
In social development, any social development with at-risk youth, being that your story is so inspiring and leaves such an impact.
Thank you. In terms of the first question, I do my best to support organizations that are involved in, civil society, social activism, right here at JAMP. I've also worked with Transparency International on some of their events. There's a wonderful organization in Copenhagen called the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network. It's a collective action network, so we should also think about collective action. For example, they reduced port corruption in Argentina by 95% over the course of 10 years by collective action. And I think to the second question, it's tough because you do feel like you're in a wind tunnel. So I would encourage new business owners to think, okay, what is the long-term plan here? And who are the trusted partners that you can work with, whether they're people you're buying from or people that you're selling to, and to say, I might have to start my business slower because I'm eliminating a big field of people that I don't want to interact with. But I think in this book, Success in Africa, talks about this. If you believe in what you do and you're patient with success, that you will get there. It just might take more time than you think. And I know that's a general response, but that is what I have seen. Belief and patience.
If I can just add to that,
please.
Both in my personal experience, being your age, I was young once, and also I'm an angel investor, so I invest personally in startup companies. Here's my advice. A lot of young people say, yeah, but I can't afford a good a board of directors. How would I ever find people like that? How could I afford a lawyer? How could I afford somebody who is an experienced marketer? And I said, look, just think about the people you know in your own personal lives. Who has common sense? Who has wisdom in your family? Uncle, cousin, next door neighbor. Get them to be one of your informal advisors. If you went to university or high school, obviously, I hope you went to high school. Think about who did a degree in law, who did a degree in marketing, who did a degree in engineering, and say, look, I'm starting my own business. Can you just come and give me advice on what to do when I drop in a pothole or before I drop in a pothole? So in other words, you don't have to spend any money to create that circle around you. I do that today. In fact, I have a group for business, one for family, one for personal investing. They're all different. I call them and I say, hey, John, Mary, what do you think of this before I actually do it? And I'm suggesting you can do the same thing to get advice to chart your company to success. Okay, over there, Mike, and then we're going over, I think, by Larry's table, was I right? And then, okay, I'm going back when I saw the hands go up. I haven't forgotten. And this is so exciting. We're going to stay here until we answer all of them. The coffee can wait.
Good morning, yes. My name is Horace Edwards, and I'm an internal audit consultant. I've worked internationally for major companies for many years. Now, my question is in regard to the tone from the top from a business. Yeah. I know you spoke about speak up, and I know speaking up is not something people naturally do. But how important is the tone at the top of any big, small company to ethics and compliance, one? And secondly, do you think people really spend enough money developing compliance processes and ethics to ensure that their companies, the base is set to move on?
Yeah. So to tone at the top, the U.S. regulator, the Department of Justice, has a statement on the evaluation of corporate compliance systems, but they changed their language from tone at the top to conduct at the top, which I think is an important shift, because it's not, every organization has great aspirational tone at the top. We don't pay bribes, we stand for responsible business practices. Just look at mission, value, ethics on any corporate website. But the question is, what are the leaders doing to promote that? How are they operationalizing that, right? So it makes sense for the roles that people face. Because I will just share, my experience with corruption in South America was much different than it was in the Middle East. So this is, just say no doesn't help. This is not a one-size problem or one-size solution. But going back to the tone at the top, most people don't have daily access to the CEO of a company, right? So it's the people in the middle of the organization that are truly and uniquely there to make that tone at the top sound louder, right, as it goes through the organization. The other thing those middle-level managers can do is dilute and discard tone at the top, not because they want to get in trouble, because they want to get business done. So I always encourage organizations, don't forget about your middle-level managers. They control the volume on getting business done and the importance on of how business gets done. And as far as the resourcing of ethics and compliance programs, every company is going to be different, but what the government says, and I think the DOJ has good guidance, is it right-sized for your organization, right? Do you have the necessary resources to have a strong program in your organization? And if anyone emails me, I can send you that LRN report from the beginning, and it has a lot about resourcing and good practices in there as well.
Thank you. Okay, next, I think is Larry. Oh.
Thank you very much. I'm Philip Ramson, President of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce. So first, thank you very much for sharing your story. I know it takes a lot of courage to share all those personal experiences. My experience in what I feel in Jamaica is that corruption it's a cultural issue, and that in Jamaica we tend to minimalize what we consider corruption. As simple as it is that you may know somebody at a tax office to cut a line, or to pay off a police officer for a speeding ticket. We tend to minimalize a lot of these things. And my concern is that by the time they reach into a position where they are in a position of power, they are already in a mindset where this is an okay type of behavior. And so my question is, as private sector, because I'm in the private sector, is how do we participate in trying to change that cultural behavior? And it is something, do you believe that not just from a business standpoint, that we should be encouraging ethics classes within high school to discuss that shift from cultural mindset?
Yeah, and Doug, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say. But one example, there's a country in South America where they basically have written off the older generation, and they said, we're now going to start teaching ethics, and good practices in school at an early age. So we're going to start with the younger generation and work our way up.
Okay, so what I would say is, and I've been working on this from I was in my 20s. How long is that? 50 years. Here's what I've learned. I can make a difference in the area I have some influence in or control. So one of the things I learned is that if we made the company I was with, Grace Kennedy, a center of excellence, then what we do is to reach out to other centers of excellence, whether they are service providers, professionals giving us advice, suppliers, and customers. And when I link with all of them, we create what I call a cluster of excellence. And then if there are others doing that in the rest of the society, then we have a network of excellence. So in other words, we're not waiting for the whole of Jamaica to rise as one. We just make a difference where we are. Yeah. So my advice is go out and make your entity, as of this afternoon, a center of excellence. I see a very persistent hand up. Is it because you want to say, okay, But, you know, you go ahead, because it sounds like, and I'm going to come to you, I'm going to have to cut off.
I think Jeanette is going to, if we're going to get thrown off the stage, I want to make sure that, I want to thank Nadia, I want to thank Jamp, but I want to give a special thanks to Jeanette Calder here. If it wasn't for her patience, especially with me, in organizing the logistics and everything practically, she has been such a source of inspiration. And thank you so much, Jeanette, for everything.
Okay, but there's one, this lady has been waiting to speak. Your name and where you work.
Aretha McFarlane is the name. I'm the Director of Operations at the National Solid Waste Management Authority. And I must first commend Richard for sharing your experience.
Thank you.
It's really inspiring, and it gives a different light on, you know, how things can go. So
thank you.
I'm appreciative. I just would like to share a little bit about the experience at NSWMA and the tone at the top in particular. I must say, a lot of persons here would know that NSWMA had a stigma attached to it for, you know, and it wasn't a good stigma. However, when board chairman Dennis Strong and our corporate governance chair, Mrs. Facey, took charge of that organization, they did set a tone at the top and came up with the core value, attire. And attire stands for accountability, teamwork, transparency, integrity, respect, and excellence. And I can attest to the success of that core value. Yes, it took work, but where NSWMA is today, as opposed to where NSWMA was, we can say this organization has really benefited from the work of persons with integrity and, you know, those who had oversight of the organization. Wonderful. And we are seeing the results of that now. Before, we never used to file audits. Now our audits are current. So I'm standing here to say that there is hope in Jamaica for change, and we're on a journey and we're not looking back.
Here. And on that note, the session is finished. Those who have a question and I didn't call on you, come up here and I'm going to write your name, and in the next session we can have it answered, because we have to cut off now. So come on up.
Thank you.
Okay, come on up. That's it. Coffee break.
Thank you. Thank you. Picture?
Yeah. Make sure I'm looking presentable. Oops.
Thank you.
Testing. Yes, I'm good. All right. Thank you very much. I see the conversations have begun in earnest. And it's always good to be having an event when the questions are still coming in, but we have to ask kindly to facilitate the promise to leave at a particular time. But I do want to thank Richard Bistrong. Richard, you're now a part of the family, Richard. Thank you.
The only thing I'm going to ask of you is that we teach you a little patois before you leave tomorrow. How's that? And I really want to thank Mr. Douglas Orane for the way in which he conducted that session. He was able to unearth so much fresh perspective and ideas and tools for us to go back and try. And before anyone leaves, particularly online, because the online team will not be with us for the roundtable discussions. We wanted to have an open session and a private session. I just wanted to, before I move into my presentation, thank everyone for their attention. That's the first thing. If I may have it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But I really do want to thank our donors in particular before they do have to depart, because I know there are several events happening today for them, but in particular the European Union, that what I'm about to share with you, you will realize came out of a body of research. And it was also the European Union in 2016 who had funded that research, which about another 5 years later developed into the organization that's here hosting you today, the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal. So I really want to thank the EU for the work that they have been doing and investing in civil society and building our capacity. And not just the EU, I love to see the taxpayers of the European Union and the taxpayers of the United Kingdom. I'm so grateful that you could also be here with us today and supporting us in this event. And to all those who have joined online, thank you for being there with us. My apologies for a late start, but we really do appreciate you all. Now, before I get into my task of the day, as the Executive Director for JAMP, it's been a little bit, you know, it was something to listen to Richard's journey, but Richard, I've been on a journey myself. And I really got a little emotional listening to yours. And if I may, before I jump right in and I'll catch up time-wise, I remember when I was beating the pavement with this idea for a Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal. I don't know where Mr. Howard Mitchell has gone to, but he was one of the first persons to buy into the idea. And for those of us who are familiar with Howard's inimitable style, I was waiting in a boardroom. He walked through the door at the PSOJ and he said, "I'm Howard Mitchell. If I like it, I'm going to help you. If I don't, it was nice to meet you." Sounds like the man? Unfortunately for me, he liked the concept and the idea. But I remember sharing with Howard that, you know, I have no skill set. I never studied political science or political administration. My training is in architecture and construction. But I loved being a public servant, and I didn't anticipate how much I would have loved serving the public. And the governance issues that I was exposed to, Richard, while I was there, is really what left a lot of residue on me. But at the same time, I remember saying to Howard, "Howard, I'm not doing this because I'm trying to make money. You know, there's no money in NGO work. I'm doing this because I know that Jamaica is going to turn the corner on the challenges that we are having." So, Richard, I made a note in the palm of my hand. You said you turned the corner from chaos and catastrophe into compliance. And I am declaring today that I know that this is a representation of what we are going to do here in Jamaica. You did it on the individual level, and we are going to do it on a collective level. So thank you very much for the inspiration this morning, sir. Now, what is the goal of JAMP? Straight up, just about like anybody in this room, we're trying to make Jamaica a better place in different ways and different approaches. So how are we doing it as an NGO? We are trying to increase the quantity and the quality of public goods and services because we know the difference that's going to make to the individual and the businesses in the room. But there are lots of people doing that as well. So how are we digging deeper for that? It says it there, through the reduction of waste, loss, fraud, and corruption in the way our public assets and funds are being stewarded. We have 3 project objectives. We want to strengthen the existing accountability mechanisms in government and parliament. And when I started off, folks, I was focusing much on the government. But I discovered that the parliament is the seat of accountability. And there really is a lot of dysfunction there. And if we get that fixed, we're going to see a lot of good things flowing in the government. So I'm going to hold that for now. Beyond strengthening that, we wanted to educate the public on basic public financial management. As I said, I can barely balance a checkbook. I knew very little about this. But I'm really pleased to say how much I started out ignorant a couple of years ago, because I think folks think I went to some kind of advocacy school to do this. No. It was really just love of country and willing to dig in to understand the basics. So we want to, in turn, freely we have received, freely we want to give what we have learned. Jeanette and Jam's goal and the team that I work with on the board, particularly the team in-house, we have a very simple, unashamed, unabashedly approach. As we learn, we turn back and we share. It's as simple as that. As I receive and I understand, we pivot and we give back. I just need to stay one step ahead of the general population, and so far so good. But that's the basic approach to the education. And then the third one is, it's not enough to educate. There are lots of people in Jamaica who know far more about these issues than I do. So it's not enough just to have knowledge. You've got to get people in the ring. So the third objective is how we're going to stimulate public engagement in Jamaica's governance processes, particularly the parliamentary process. Now, where did we start? Really quickly. I get that question a lot. And it's really an inflection point that many of us would remember in 2014 November with the Outameni incident, when the NHT invested $180 million at many of us of citizens. And I'm an architect. I worked in the Ministry of Housing. I understand the squatting problem. I was deeply offended by it. And so I organized a protest right in front of the NHT, thinking I would be there by myself. But what I learned that day is exactly what is still carrying me, which is what I have in my heart isn't special. There are lots of Jamaicans feeling that same way. You just act on what's right in front of you, Jeanette, that you think needs to be done, and you trust the other Jamaicans will join you, and that's exactly what happened. I went out there by myself, and by the time the day was over, we had about 32, at most about 60 persons with us. But what's fascinating is that little did I know I was going to begin a journey with some special people in that picture. Does anybody recognize anybody there? It's very unusual to see the PSOG team on the street when you know. So out came the former Beverly Lopez of blessed memory. There we have Mr. Chris Tucker himself and Mr. William Mahfoud, who brought us water and juice. But it was the beginning of a relationship, but little did I know what it was going to amount into. But they were out there defending the rights of their employees to have good housing, and were very concerned about the decision that the NHT had taken. Now, this led to 9 sponsors coming along later to seed into the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, of which I am grateful. So I just wanted to share with them who they are, and to say to them that they took a leap of faith, and I think it's paying dividends at this point in time. Now, after the incident at Outameni, I began some research, and part of it is looking into an amazing treasure that Jamaicans have called the Gleaner Archive. And just by searching through the Gleaner Archive, I took a look at the headlines across the years just by searching for the Auditor General. And why I like to show this slide, no matter where I present, is that it tells a tale, and it's not depressing to me. It tells me that we have a systemic problem. It tells me that it's a problem that goes beyond any particular administration. This is not a JLP or a PNP problem. It's a human nature problem that we're struggling with. 1958 parish accounts, and if I were to read what's in the small print, it would look no different from the headline from the Gleaner last month that spoke about the major accountability issues for billions of dollars that have gone unreported from the parish accounts. Now, this one from 1984 that says Auditor General is dissatisfied with national accounts might ring a bell, because again in January we had headlines from the Gleaner telling us what? That there's a $1 trillion accountability crisis. You might say, Jeanette, you're depressing me, but I'm going somewhere well with this. When I dug a little deeper into the archives, when I dug a little deeper into that particular article of 1984, there was a Jamaican in February 15, he named himself Scrutator when he wrote the Gleaner. And he was commenting on the Auditor General's report, but I just want to point you to his last question, and that is the question that grabbed my attention in 2016 that led to the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal. You see what he's asking? Can we hope that immediate attention will be given to the Auditor General's report and his recommendations put in train? It was such a simple question. But I thought to myself, yes, why haven't we been doing that? And could it be as simple as that? In 2016, I decided to Google to see what were the headlines in that same year. And this is what it looked like. And these are only a few representing what? The loss, the waste, and the mismanagement that is taking place. And I thought to myself, what can we do? Well, having just learned how to read the national budget, because then I was given the task of converting Jamaica's budget into our first simplified citizens budget, I asked myself, how much are we spending on accountability? I thought 2.5 billion was a massive amount of money. Well, just out of interest, what do you think we're spending this year? Anybody wants to guess? On the top 5 agencies dealing with accountability, we are allocating 10.35 billion. I asked myself in 2016, are we getting value from the 2.5? And the answer was no, not if the headlines that I just showed you are true. I'm asking us, how are we going to extract value from this $10.35 billion this year? And my answer is, the game is already set in our favor, folks. JAMP exists because we actually believe that the cup is not half full, it's more than half full. Why is that so? Very quickly. There are at least 12 pieces of legislation dealing with combating corruption in Jamaica. That's a strong legislative framework, folks. We have 6 oversight agencies, 2 of which don't exist in most other Commonwealth countries. We have 5 parliamentary oversight committees that are supposed to be reviewing these matters for us. 2 don't exist in most of the other Commonwealth countries. We have civil society organizations, press freedom that has been stellar for a number of years, but let me tell you, in 2022, we fell out of the top 10 to 32. That's not something we're gonna pick up now, but I just thought I would mention that. But strong press freedom that makes the first 4 make all the difference. We have development partners. Jeanette is here, JAMP is here, the team is here, my board is here because the EU and the UK are willing to invest. Notice I didn't say fund, but invest in what we're doing in governance. We have technology that we're harnessing, and here's the secret weapon I think Jamaica has. The same Gen Z and the millennials who are not prepared to have the patience that most of us have had in this room for the dreams that they are pursuing. So with this in place, why are we seeing those headlines? Well, this is my diagnosis. It's not a what that is missing, it's a who. And who do you think is missing? Anybody wants to guess? Exactly, I heard a whisper. There it is. I remember as I did that when we were growing up, parents would tell us that when we point a finger, there are 3 fingers pointing back. And one of the reasons I like this is that every time I point at the politician, there are 3 fingers doing what? Pointing back at me. And I actually really believe that that's a powerful statement because I really believe it's more about us than it is about the politician. Now, I want to just quickly, before I get into the demo that I wanted to, of the tools of JAMP and what's the work that we're actually doing. In the last 4 years of doing this work, I've kind of coalesced our message down to something that I have to share before I move on. I believe citizens are the linchpin. And while I was listening to Richard, just quickly, 3 things quickly flashed in my mind. How Jamaicans became a standard bearer for free and fair elections. And if you spoke to people in the 1980s, and there are people here, and told them that in 2 decades, we would be the standard bearers, oh, come on. But once we set our minds to it, it took 3 things. The legislative framework from the parliament working, an institutional framework that came out of that legislation, the EOJ, the ECJ, and the civil society like CAFE and the rest of us. And we did a 180-degree turn. Quickly, the IMF, who was refusing to give us money a decade and a half ago. Some folks tell me that they set up a deal expecting that Jamaica would fail. Expecting and anticipating it. But we brought those same 3 together, didn't we? EPOC, representing civil society, the parliament, the business sector, and what did we do? We shocked the world. I've never forgotten, and I am sorry I don't have the picture, that Christine Lagarde on the front page of the Gleaner saying, Jamaica, you did it. And then she said, what you now have to fix are the governance concerns in this country. I'll find that headline and I'll email it to all of you. But what she was saying is that you're capable. So here we are confronting something that looks very intractable, and I'm saying it again. If we bring those three things together, Camille, I guarantee you Jamaica will be exporting a model to the other Commonwealth countries again as to how we did it. Now, the citizens are going to be key, and I just want to say to you that the message that JAMP has, and you'll hear me keep on repeating this maybe for another year or 2 or 3 or 4, or as long as I'm going to have to, because what Richard is sharing with us and what Douglas did is about a mindset shift that needed to happen. And I don't think I'm that special. I have experienced a mindset shift, and I'm hoping I can duplicate it. And what is that? It's redefining who I am. I'm not just a citizen, and I think that's the problem. When you use the word citizen, it's a lovely, beautiful, fuzzy feeling kind of word, but it's really telling you where you belong. And if you've ever lived out of Jamaica, that's a very special word, citizen. But I'm more interested in the word on the screen, which tells us what belongs to us. And that is the resources and the assets and the funds that are in the bank. And when I drive along and I see Crown land, I don't think of it as government land anymore. It's mine. And when I drive past the same NHT, I don't think of it as the NHT. That's mine. So I want us to redefine ourselves not just as citizens, but owners. I want us to redefine ourselves not just as voters, but as employers. For JAMP, voting is a mechanism that, replaces 63 public officials every 4.5 years. When you think of yourself as a voter, it sends a message that there is one thing you have to do every 4.5 years. And that thing that you have to do is becoming a means to somebody else's end. But if you recognize voting as a means of hiring and paying the salary of 63 very, very special and important public officials, then I believe that my behavior shifts. Because what does an employer do, Ian? I see you nodding. We monitor, we check on performance, we hold people to accountable. And the last is, I'm not just a taxpayer. I had to press that button yesterday. Tomorrow is tax day. And typically I press that button and I never want to think about it again. But now I see myself as a what? A financier, an investor. And when you use the word investment, what are you looking for? A return on? Right. And it's not money, but what? Good roads, good schools. Yes? Yes. Clean environment. So Jeanette is saying we're not just citizens missing in action, but we're owners, employers, and financiers. And if we begin to think of it that way, I believe that there will be a change in our behavior. Now, we mapped this called the accountability framework, and we came up with a portal, which is what I want to demo in the few minutes I have. It's just an appetizer to show you the work that JAMP has been doing. Now, what this portal is putting citizens, which are really employers, financiers, yes, and owners, in a position to do the job. Everybody here as employees, what do you give them? Information and tools to get the job done. But how does a citizen hold the government to account? It's not so easy. So JAMP has created a portal that allows the Jamaicans at home and the Jamaicans who are watching abroad. We're filling the gap in the information that they need, and we're bringing the policy holders, the policy makers closer to them, harnessing the power of technology. Now I'm just going to quickly shift over to the website. I'm only going to get a chance to demo 2 of the tools, but I'm certainly going to hope that after demoing 2, that on departure, everybody in the room will head over to see what the other 4 can do. In your program, there's a description as well of the other 2 that will come on stream before the year is out. So the 6 that we have, a national budget tool, and if you've ever seen the budget, it's a very intimidating 20-pound, 1,000-page document the average citizen is not going to show any interest in. The MP tracker gives us access to our parliamentarians and basically assesses their compliance with some accountability indicators like attendance. Yeah? The Accountability, which I have to confess is my favorite, it is tracking the breaches, mostly from the Auditor General. You know, we talk about the 9-day wonder. This is our means of combating it, identifying breaches, tracking them so that our parliament, our media, citizens can keep abreast of it until they are remedied. The Procurement Tracker, which is a very impressive database of 179,000 contracts that I am very proud that this jurisdiction has, that we have actually converted in a tool, which is one of the 2 that I will share with you today. The Legislative Tracker is intended to be a tool that demystifies that very, very sacred space of Parliament for citizens so that they can begin to understand the decisions that are taken there for them. And the last, which is the newest so far, is the access to information tool. It's actually the gift that the government of Jamaica has given to us for 22 years that has empowered JAMP to do the work that it's doing, but we want to put it in the hands of every citizen that has a governance question. Now, I want to start quickly with the national budget tool, and all this basically is presenting the family budget, which is what we refer to it, what the government will be doing for the next 12 months with our taxes. We have explanatory videos for citizens to help them to understand it better, a database on the left where you can access the actual data sources given to us by the Ministry of Finance, and the rest of it is really just about simplifying it. Here you see the different services and how they're broken up by the budget, the revenue that's going to be coming in, and the source of funds. It's very easy. There's an expenditure summary, which I'm going to skip over and just head to the expenditure estimates, because the summary is going to be an estimate of what came before. Now, this might look complicated, and we are putting up tutorials to explain to citizens how this works. But this is our budget in a way in which I want to congratulate the Ministry of Finance. There are filters here from years, spending type, projects the government will be working on, but this is my favorite, specific items. And why is this? The Ministry of Finance has handed to JAMP and given us a level of transparency, which I really commend them for, where the first time in the history of Jamaica, citizens can have access to the minutiae of what our government is spending. So if I type in envelopes, and I were to click that, you would know immediately what the government is spending on envelopes. If I tried something as mundane as cows, they are there. If I tried, I heard Richard said he dealt with armored vehicles. If we put in maybe, what was that? Maybe courier? Armored courier services. Richard, maybe you had a contract here in Jamaica back in those days. So this is a level of transparency that I've airfare. You can come, you can scroll, and you can see what is it that is of interest to you and your business. So let me just give you a quick case study. What if there are one of the young entrepreneurs in the room that does computers? You put computer in, and immediately there's a long list of what? Things that the government are going to have to procure. Now, let's say we tried personal computers, because there must be somebody in here dealing with that. Immediately at the click of a button, we know exactly that the government will be spending, wow, that's a lot, almost $1 billion on computers. And this was last year's budget. We are still in that financial year. We also have the capital. So if you add 46 million and 87, it's somewhere like $893 million. Now, if you look to the left and you sell computers, JAMP is telling you exactly where you need to focus your attention. And that will be the court management services, who will be needing almost $250 million, and the Ministry of Health. I'd recommend to anybody to get a nice package on what you do, send it over and let them know you're registered with the PPC and you're interested in being on their list. Now, that's just a quick case study of showing you how fast you would be able to analyze where your money is going as a taxpayer, but as the business sector, how you can capitalize on that. Now, I am going to leave the team to take a look at what else this will provide, but it just keeps digging in deeper and deeper as you scroll down, using simple data visualization and the power of technology, as I promised. The revenue estimates, which not many people tend to express an interest in, but the same framework is there, providing similar kind of information as it relates to our source of money, our loan portfolio, and last but by no means least, and I think this is very important for those who are the economists in the country and the students, are trends. We'll be comparing always the first year to the current year, color coding it. You can see immediately from the brown or the burnt orange what has decreased since last year, and from the blue what has increased. And we should have an applause for the ministry. We had a 26% decrease in public debt servicing, and it was as easy as that. So thank you very much for that. And this clap is really for the hard-working civil servants at the Ministry of Finance. So this is a good idea. I want to just quickly show you what's also possible in trends. We have here, you can search the trends, source of funds, the public entity, the government service, the spending type, the activity, and item. So let's say we go back to item, and let's say we go back to computers just to keep it consistent, just to give you an idea of what will happen here. And we go back to personal computers so that, we're staying on top of it. What does this tell us? It just quickly gives us an idea of where we have come from last year, where we were 428 million versus a doubling. And why is that? We have the fiscal space to do that now. So that's a very quick demonstration of the power that we now have in our hands as citizens. And my dream, as I flip over to the next demo, is to have Jamaicans wake up in the morning and see, for example, that the government is about to spend on 70 garbage trucks. But they can immediately turn to their phone to see, is this an impulsive buy? Because, women buy impulsively, governments do as well, right? So that citizen sitting at his morning table would be able to simply put in garbage trucks, specific item, to see if the Parliament of Jamaica had indeed approved that spend. And if they didn't, then the access to information tool is right there where they can get in touch with their minister. Now, this is our procurement tracker, and I'm going to see if I can do this in 3 minutes. I'm really impressed with what Mr. Greg Christie did starting back in 2006, which is building out a massive database, which is almost a best-kept secret. This is what it actually looks like on the website of the Integrity Commission. There are very few of us who could actually manipulate this and get the kind of information that we want. So JAMP saw this and said, how can we make this an easier way of analyzing and manipulating for the private sector, for the anti-corruption bodies, for the media, for the parliamentarians, and for the citizens of Jamaica. So what we have done is we've converted that spreadsheet into a data visualization tool. Let me see if I can reduce this on the screen. 179,000 contracts awarded over 14 years, 816 billion with 251 procuring entities. Now, the best way for me to explain what these charts do is a quick case study before I hand over to the panel. Now, let's try, for example, one of the filters on this side. I'd say the Bank of Jamaica. That's a safe one to try. You type in the name of the procuring entity that you're interested in. And we have the Bank of Jamaica right here. We hit apply, and immediately what we have is a reduction in the contracts awarded, specifically addressing over the last 14 years what the BOJ has in terms of number, the value. But then the very first chart tells a tale about the type of procurement, Mr. Hay, we have from the FID. I'm so glad you could make it. It shows us immediately that the bulk of the BOJ's contracts in blue, and there is the legend here, have been restricted. And then the second biggest is the single source. Now, if you hover, you will see that that's 956 contracts and the value of 3.1 billion. And here, if you hover, 1,325 at 2.9. Now, if you continue to scroll, it shows you the picture of the BOJ over time, comparing the different types of procurement methodology, getting down more into the details of the value and the contractors, meaning not the building contractors, but who was contracted for these projects. And last chart at the bottom gives you some more details. Now, let us say, to wrap up, if you wanted to compare, going back to computers, the relationship between the Bank of Jamaica and a particular entity, let's just put in, say, Microsoft. And, well, let's just pick one. Let's say Microsoft Corporation, and we click apply. The 2,500 contracts are now down to 12, 110 million, and we can see immediately the nature of the procurement methodology. We have 11 that were single-sourced and 1 emergency. So that's just giving you a taste of what is possible in terms of analyzing the patterns and the trends as public funds flow towards the business community. I'm going to close by saying this might be a little uncomfortable, and we're here as family, and let me say, it can produce some information that might be uncomfortable for some members of the community, but I'm gonna encourage us to remember what Mr. Bistrong said. he did indicate that we're going to have some uncomfortable moments as we move from chaos to change and some shame. But I believe that this is a tool that could also be used strategically, and I'm sorry the time isn't here for me to demonstrate that. But I'm going to leave it to the persons with the experience in the room to apply these tools in a way that JAMP has not even begun to think of. But I thank you for the time this morning, and I encourage you to come and take a look at the other tools that we have and see how we can begin to build a Jamaica. What's our vision? The place that? The place for? Choice for? Live, work, and raise our families, and as our anthem says, to advance the welfare of the whole human race. Thank you very much, everybody.
That has been so much incredible content. You deserve a break. But listen, you're going to be back at 11:30 because Mr. Howard Mitchell is not messing around with you. Remember, that's a participation section. So 11:30, right back here. Do speak with Jeanette about bringing these tools into your company and about ways in which we can partner with private sector. Remember, Doug is right there. Richard is right there. They want to hear more of your questions. And remember, you're starting to generate and brainstorm because we're going to be hearing about you as far as practical, actionable next steps from what we have discussed today. See you at 11:30.
Thank you.
Why do I spend millions on this and not on that? Well, if you think there's nothing you can do about how your money is spent, think again. Jamaica's budget is more than just numbers. It reveals our biggest problems and goals, our plans to fix them, and what to prioritize. We can even call it a promise book of what will be done to improve our lives. Now, let's talk about the 4 stages of the budget cycle so we can understand how it works and get involved. Stage 1, planning and review. The Ministry of Finance sends out a budget call to every ministry, which outlines the priorities and constraints to guide how those ministries prepare their budget. After ministries submit their drafts, the Finance Ministry reviews, compiles, and sends them to Cabinet for review and approval. Stage 2, parliamentary debate and approval. The Finance Minister tables all budget documents in the House of Representatives. The Standing Finance Committee, which is all 63 MPs, sits to examine the budget documents, and each minister presents their budget and answers concerns the committee has. The committee's report is then tabled in the House, followed by the estimated expenditure, which is tabled as legislation called the Appropriations Bill. That's right, the budget of Jamaica is law. The budget debate formally opens. We have presentations from the Minister of